Welcome to the Bamboo Podcast, where we interview a range of guests about self-care, infant care, and relationships during the perinatal period. We are your hosts, Leah
and Kayla.
Today we interview Dr. Vincent Mancini, a Senior Research Fellow at the Telethon Kids Institute in Perth, Western Australia. Vincent is involved with the Fathering Project, which is aimed at empowering fathers and father figures to improve the health and well-being of children.
Vincent discusses the benefits and dangers of online parenting forums, how new fathers can navigate their changing partner relationships, and dealing with a preterm birth. If you enjoy this podcast, check out the episode linked below where we chat to Vincent about parental reflective functioning, which is the process of parents trying to understand both their own and their children's thoughts, feelings, and intentions. Vincent also discusses co-parenting, self-compassion, and self-care. We hope you enjoy. Hi, Vincent. Welcome to the Bamboo Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm very well in what is sunny but cold Perth. It's good to be here. Thanks.
So we're very excited to talk to you today about your research endeavors, and something that you've been working on for a while now is the Fathering Project. So what are the aims of the Fathering Project? How does it aim to empower fathers?
So the Fathering Project is more than just a specific research project. It's actually an organisation that delivers services into the community for fathers experiencing a range of challenges, but also those fathers and father figures who are actually just interested in upskilling themselves or wanting to share resources with other dads. In short, I suppose I have two major roles with the Fathering Project. The first is to help evaluate their current programs and services that they offer to the community. So, for example, they offer a service where we provide dads groups in schools. It's probably the one that's the most frequently attended with the biggest footprint. But we also offer corporate programs as well. So we go out into the workplace and actually work with employers and employees around promoting inclusivity for fathers in the workplace. You know, the idea about dads feeling uncomfortable about asking to take time away to go to the sports carnival or to parent-teacher evening. So try and actually transform the culture in a workplace. And the last thing that we do as well is around what we've called the community fathering. So here we do some intensive case management, more for those fathers who are experiencing disadvantage. So what I do is I help evaluate all of those programs. But then the other piece of my work is actually to generate new knowledge and new research on fathering.
Wow, that is really impressive. I think there was a few things that I got out of that. Was that first off, I know that it's really hard to generally in research to get fathers to participate in research. So what you guys are doing is amazing to get people on board and to have those conversations. I was wondering, like, as you were speaking, the dads in schools, is that like a networking kind of group that the dads all meet at the same school and they get to know each other, and therefore they get to know the children within the school and their friends, and and who facilitates that program?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think our dads group model is probably the thing that really put the Fathering Project on the map. What I would say is that typically speaking, the dads groups do happen at schools. They don't exclusively happen at schools. So we might have some sporting clubs and organizations that might want to run a dads group there. But in terms of the facilitation component, the way that it sort of works with the Fathering Project is that they'll reach out to us, or sometimes they'll come to a presentation, an evening that we might do at a school, we might do an event. And they say, look, this is a really great idea. We really want to run a dads group here. And so we identify what I would consider maybe some potential champions for the dads group or dads group leaders. And they come and do a little bit of training with the Fathering Project, get some support with the Fathering Project, access to lots of different resources, activities, and we help them at their school or at their organization identify their identity as a dads group. How often do you want to meet? Where do you want to meet? Some want to use the school. Some might want to use the park nearby. Some are really active, so they'll do sports-based activities. Some will do stuff at the beach. So we sort of work with them and their parameters because, like you mentioned, getting dads engaged is quite challenging. And what we found is one of the best ways to actually engage with them is to partner up with them and say, what works for you, what works for your school, what works for the dads in your dads group, and then we go from there.
Do you find through your work that dads are more inclined to engage in these sorts of programs when their children are a bit older and don't reach out when they have newborns or during those early years?
This is a really good question. And I think the best way to summarize it is you don't know what you don't know. A really common story that we'll hear from the dads who come to the dads groups, most of which are in primary school or sort of primary school age kids, is they'll hear that there's a dads group running because of some event that happens or something in the newsletter, and they come along and they take part and they go, whoa, this was awesome. And then they go, where was this when I had a toddler? Where was this when I had a 2-year-old? And for those dads who attend who have, one kid in primary school and one that might be 2 or 3, what you find is that inevitably some of the discourse and the conversation will flow more towards managing the terrible twos or dealing with babies who aren't sleeping well, or breastfeeding and supporting their partner through feeding, etc. So I think that there is very much an appetite from those fathers who have been a part of a dad's group. Oftentimes they'll take part in their first dad's group when their children are a little older, and then they'll go, oh man, I really needed this back when I had a younger one. So part of the work that we're also doing, and a lot of my research as well, really does focus on supporting fathers and families during those first 5 years.
Thinking about those support groups and online parenting forums specifically, they seem to be a really great way for parents and dads to connect and learn from others. What are the potential benefits, thinking of fathers specifically?
We just published a study which was looking specifically at this very topic. What do dads get out of online communities that are created by dads and for dads? So this is almost a peer support model. This isn't like a psychologist doing a video series or a podcast or a live webinar or anything like that. This is sort of pure fly on the wall. When we get a group of dads together in a digital environment, what are they talking about and what are they getting out of it? So if I was to give the very quick answer, 3 words: connection, community, and convenience. Those were the 3 C's about why dads are coming together on these spaces. What's really, I think, really interesting is just how much appetite there actually is for these types of groups and communities. It almost seems to me as a researcher that these fathers are crying out for connection to other dads. They want to know basically everything. How are other dads parenting? What are they doing? What aren't they doing? What problems are they going through? Where can I relate? But also as well, I suppose, and this is maybe why the dads sort of peer element to supporting dads is really powerful, is not to play into gender stereotypes, but dads and men in particular like to be in situations where not only they receive support, but they can provide support as well. So you might get some dads that are posting things like, hey guys, trying to handle my child's challenging behavior without getting angry myself. What are some things that you do? And people chime in, and these become a real hub of activity. But I think also not just in terms of online communities like Facebook groups, but what we've also seen is, for example, for people that use Reddit, there's a subreddit called the Daddit subreddit, which is just all for fathers. That has something like 16 million members. We're doing a project at the moment around TikTok and the portrayal of fatherhood, as particularly new fathers on TikTok. And a hashtag like hashtag dads of TikTok has somewhere in the realm of 58 to 60 billion views. So for me as a researcher thinking about creating content, even for us right now recording a podcast, I'd love to reach 58 billion people. But it's important to recognize that these types of informal, community-driven opportunities to connect dads to other dads are very popular, very prevalent. There's a lot of benefits. To tie it all back to connection to other dads, a community of other dads, and then it's convenient as well. So it's not somewhere where you have to wait until the next meeting for the dads group. You kind of have access to this collective wisdom on your smartphone, on your computer, and you can sort of post a question when you go to sleep and wake up and see, however many different answers and opinions.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. If you are struggling with an infant in the middle of the night, you can search and see for questions already up that's relevant to you, right? You don't have to text someone, reach out to someone, and maybe they'll only see that the next day. So that's, really great.
Yeah, agree. Agree.
And doesn't it all just come back to connection? Like you can see how these forums can be so amazing for mums when they're feeling isolated, when they live in rural and remote areas. But why have we not always then been looking to say, well, dads need this as well? So it's so lovely to see that it's coming to that forefront for people, that dads have got that support. They've got, that peer support when, like you were saying in WA, if they're in fly in, fly out, and they're not even with their families, like then connecting to other dads and saying, I'm really missing my kids because, this is happening back at home. I can't be there. And then you could get another whole range of other dads saying we're feeling exactly the same way.
Absolutely. And I think the thing about these groups as well is that there's no misconception about why you're there. All of the men in those groups are there not because they're a FIFO worker or a plumber or they're in the army or they play sport. They're all there because they're dads. And so I think a lot of my work around engaging fathers has been around sort of giving them permission to sort of wear their dad hat or wear their identity as a father when they come in. So the other idea being that you might be at work and you sort of have to do this awkward sort of filtering out which of the guys that you work with are also dads and which ones are happy to talk about their kids and then which ones are happy to hear you when you ask questions about support for parenting and how they got through the terrible twos or sleep or whatever it is. Whereas on these types of communities, I guess the mission is quite clear, and so people don't have to go through that awkward, oh, should I ask, shouldn't I ask? They're more than happy to post questions, and I would love for us as psychologists to be able to welcome dads into any type of service or intervention program that we might provide. Again, there's still some stigma around mental health, support seeking, help seeking that men and women, but also men really struggle with. What I find particularly interesting is that some of the dads that I see in these online groups are the exact type of dad who I would never see in a private practice or in a therapeutic setting, but they're more than happy to go into this community setting. And some of the conversation is very intimate and private, and it's just so fascinating for me that there are dads out there who would much rather post on one of these groups to maybe 3,000, 5,000 members that it's got their name, it's not anonymous, and they'll post questions around sexual functioning after the birth of their child. So how did you get your intimacy back? They'll post about infidelity, mental health struggles, suicidal ideation, diet, exercise, things that they've done that they wish they could have done better, divorce, separation, you name it. They're willing to sort of open themselves up to a community of about 3,000 dads, all of whom can see who's posting the content, rather than coming and speaking to one healthcare professional who's got confidentiality clauses and rules and regulations around who they can speak to. So it's just a real testament to the value of these groups, especially for a lot of men who need support who wouldn't really get it in any other way.
Is there anything dads should look out for when they're using online platforms?
What I would say is that with any sort of community-based support, particularly online support, healthcare professionals, experts don't always have as much insight into the type of discourse and conversation happening within those communities. So what that means is that we can't always necessarily vouch for the quality of the advice or the quality of the support. I would say that this is a good opportunity for dads to maybe get some ideas, but I wouldn't necessarily say that it's gospel or these are how you should be parenting your children. There's a real phenomena in social media, and I don't know if either of you are aware of this, or maybe the people listening to this aren't either, but they talk about this thing called the 90-10-1 rule in social media. So what this means is that approximately 90% of consumers of social media actually don't post anything. They just lurk. So you might be, part of a Facebook group and a forum, and you just read and you consume the content. That's about 90% of.
I am absolutely a lurker.
I'm a lurker too.
Yeah. So, and a lot of us are. It's approximately sort of 9 to 10%. It's about, we'll say 9% just for roundness sake. So 9% of people will engage with content. So they'll like it, they'll reshare it, they might react to posts, etc. And then really it's about 1% of people who are part of that community online will post content and create and generate content. So what this does mean is that sometimes the identity or the opinions that are expressed on a particular page are actually representative of a very small group of members there. So it's very hard to actually extract what is the overall consensus amongst this group, knowing that really only a small proportion of people actually will post content. Going back to your question around what we might need to look out for here is we probably also need to feel comfortable knowing when to ask beyond the community of dads. So when there is need for professional support, you've got someone who's posting about their mental health, how they're in a really dark place and maybe having some sort of suicidal thoughts. Maybe the community is one, but not a primary source of support. Maybe we need people to be able to say, look, mate, I'm really worried about you. I've never met you. I just know we're on this same page. You're a stranger to me, but we're all part of this group because we're dads. We're here for our kids. And I'm hoping that you might be able to consider maybe, giving Lifeline a call or getting in touch with some professional support.
Yeah, I like that sort of tailored approach in supporting one another, that it's not just here's the link to Lifeline, that in forging those connections, you actually, if you want to support someone's mental health and be really engaged in those sorts of forums, it needs to be a little bit more personal to ensure that people are getting the adequate support.
Yeah, absolutely.
For fathers who are feeling maybe a little bit disconnected from their unborn or their newborn child, because the mum has the child developing within her body, sometimes dads can feel a little bit disconnected from that process before the child is born. So what are some strategies that they can use?
The first is probably around managing expectations and also recognizing that building a bond with your baby does take time and patience. It's a learning process. You're learning about your child, your new relationship with your partner, as well as your child is actually, despite it being an infant baby, it's learning about the world around them. It's learning about you. It's learning about mum. It's learning about the type of support that you provide for it. I'd say what you can also do is you can take part in developmental activities, even in pregnancy, actually. So I spoke to a group of dads the other day talking about when was the moment that you first felt like a father? And there are a lot of different answers, but one person in the crowd sort of gave an answer, which was that he was sort of interacting with the baby before it was born. So, you feel it kicking and pushing and it's responding to dad's touch on mum's tummy. And what that really shows is that early on, even pre-birth, there are these activities that dads can engage with their children, and those types of exchanges between a father and an infant can build that bond. It's important to recognize that a bond is built. It's not something that is guaranteed, and it's not something that will flourish on its own without having to worry about it. It takes time. Things will go right, things will go wrong. But it's that consistency of care, being present, being able to engage with your baby, getting involved in caregiving tasks. So even things around that aren't around the baby. So what can you be doing around the home, the environment, to actually help set your baby up for a really successful developmental journey? Talking to babies, singing to babies, parents' voice is really critical. Even the scent of parents is really useful when it comes to building bonds with children. And I know that this is a fairly long answer, so I apologize, but there's lots of things. One of the things that we've actually seen in some research around dad's hormonal changes, so what's actually happening at the endocrine level to dad's testosterone, what you actually see is that when dads are holding their babies, they experience a release, like a dump of oxytocin. And what's also particularly interesting is that dump of oxytocin sort of lingers even after they put their baby back or hand their baby back. So there's this real hormonal component, like it's biology, that actually helps to build that bond. And maybe the last thing on the biology and the physiology of father-child contact is this concept of skin-to-skin contact as well. This idea of skin-to-skin contact, so actually holding your baby skin on skin, helps to regulate both dad's heartbeat as well as baby's heartbeat. Holding your baby in a safe way on skin to skin contact can actually help cultivate your baby's skin microbiome as well, which is good for their health and their development, as well as the warmth between parent and child as well. So this physical closeness also gets to help create that emotional bond.
I love that. I really loved when you were talking about while the mother's still pregnant, having that physical touch, feeling the kick and that sort of thing. And also singing, and what we know from some of our research as well is that music is really important. So babies can recognize, shortly after they're born, some of the music or TV shows, things like that they've heard. So dads can definitely play some of their favorite music, sing some of their favorite songs, and that's a great way to engage with their babies as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You're starting to you're starting to share a little bit of yourself with your infant, and it's just remarkable that as science continues to evolve, we start to learn and be surprised about how attentive and aware babies are of their environment. So those first few years of life, there's just so much absorption happening. So that imprinting that dads can have on their kids can be remarkably positive when done well.
Just going to add in there, and isn't it so important just to keep coming back to that the fathers are learning, the mothers are learning, and the baby's learning, like you're all just learning about each other and taking that pressure off ourselves, that attachment and bond and all of that can ebb and flow. Like it can constantly be this process of you learning to be with each other and you guys just strengthening those bonds.
Yeah, exactly.
And on that note, how can fathers navigate that changing relationship with their partner? So everyone's getting used to their new role as a parent, and that obviously affects relationships. What sort of advice or strategies do you have for new dads?
Good communication between parents is really critical. You might think about actually sitting down and having a discussion around what your values are now that you're a family. Thinking about how your relationship may change rather than just letting it change and people sort of don't acknowledge that. If you turn attention to it, it allows you and your partner to discuss this fairly openly. So thinking about, all right, we know that we're going to be missing out on a few more dinners or a few more social events, things that we really used to love. Letting your partner know that you're also going to miss those things. And thinking about ways that you could maybe substitute those previous things that you used to really value and can't do as much of in your relationship, or finding a way to do them. So maybe it might be, look, once a month, non-negotiable, we're doing a date night, just you and me. We'll move hell or high water. We'll get babysitters, we'll get grandparents, we'll get uncles, aunties, whoever, people we trust to be able to look after baby, so we can still do those things that we really enjoyed and love together. So that communication is just so critical. Yeah, I would say that working with your partner, so understanding your new dynamic and developing your new identity as a couple will be really important. But also as well, it's not unreasonable to also to call in a third party as well. So if things are still difficult, if you feel like your needs aren't being met, your partner's needs aren't being met, and maybe baby's needs aren't being met, thinking about consulting with some sort of healthcare support early is probably a good strategy to adopt, even before things become a major problem.
Yeah, I love that.
I love that too. You actually, as you were speaking, it kind of took me back to when we had new kids and, like little newborns and that. And my husband is a rugby union player. So that was really important for him to continue playing rugby. But I was also like, well, I can't have you out of the house 2 nights a week plus on Saturdays. And we kind of came to an agreement beforehand that he would only go to 1 practice instead of the 2. And his team was on board with that, and he was still able to play the full game on a Saturday. But making that Saturday was our family day where we would go and watch him, playing rugby and that. But it all comes back to communication. I feel like most things generally do within a relationship.
Maybe without that conversation happening, you may not have understood really just how important rugby was for him. So actually being able to sit down and understand each other's interests and motivations, being clear on why these things are important, but also the compromise as well is, just really helps to strengthen relationships.
What about in the case of like, if you do have a preterm birth, like how can fathers support the infant and their partner during that time? Because I know that it's a really stressful time. particularly when the baby comes early, but they may feel a little bit like they can't help as much as they were planning on helping.
In Australia, we know that approximately 10% of babies are born early, and it's about 18% of babies will actually spend some time in either the NICU or the special care nursery before they go home. So for a lot of these babies, it might just be overnight for observation, or it might be, a 2 or 3 day stay. But there are a proportion of these babies and their families who will spend, upwards of 100 days in the NICU. So that NICU experience, preterm birth trauma, is a family trauma. So it's not just traumatic for the baby, it's not just traumatic for mum, it's traumatic for the entire family system, and in some cultures for the community as well. So when we think about taking a village to raise a child, the whole village can experience maybe the shock and the distress associated with an unexpected birth. I identified 6 different strategies that have an evidence base around what dads can do for both their baby and their partner and their family during this NICU journey. These were broken up into 3 direct efforts and 3 indirect efforts to support baby. So of the 3 direct efforts, the first is kangaroo care or skin-to-skin contact. Skin-to-skin contact has a range of benefits, not just for dad, but also for babies. So you're looking at regulation of breathing, that body warmth, skin microbiome that occurs through that exchange through skin-to-skin contact, hormonal changes, the release of oxytocin, etc. So skin-to-skin contact is a really powerful way to actually support the development of your kid. So that's the first one. The second is infant-directed speech. So talking to your infant. What I mean by infant-directed speech is it's not just passive background noise. It's you're actually talking to your baby or singing to your baby or reading to your baby. And the third direct piece is tactile stimulation. So touch and that sensation that comes from touch. So being not just holding your baby, but also, like they talk about like baby massage. So, that kind of stimulation that can happen there. That also has developmental benefits for children in the long term as well. So what's happening in this really critical sort of NICU space, which might be a week or 2 weeks or a day or 5 weeks, etc., can have a massive impact on the development of the child.
Just on that note of massage, I was just wondering, do parents have to have, a lot of experience, or is it something that they can just, just as you would think, just massaging, rubbing the feet, that sort of thing? And is that still going to be beneficial without any sort of experience or background doing massage?
Yeah, you can definitely learn this. So what I would say is just talk to the treating physicians, nurses, etc., who would also be able to encourage you and show you. So you've got those midwives, nursing staff, etc., that have done this, built a career around this. So these people are real repositories of wisdom there. So I'd say before you launch into it, just run it past them and get some tips, get some advice, because even in that early window, babies develop at such different rates as well. So asking them, when is it safe to do so? How do I do it? How long for, etc. It's a good question. Those 3 indirect efforts, because those are the 3 direct efforts, the 3 indirect efforts to support preterm baby. The first is co-parenting. And you'll see this anecdotally if someone listening to this has also had the experience of a preterm birth where you've got other children as well. You'll find that dads who are able to maybe step into that role of mum for other kids, so they're doing school runs, making lunches, some of the duties that they may not have done previously, or juggling dual roles now because they're at work and they're picking up some more of the work at home as well, if you're in that kind of family. That allows mum to be more present for their baby in the NICU. So they're able to go to the hospital more, do more of the feeding. They might be able to do more of the kangaroo care, etc. So what dad might be doing at home might actually have downstream benefits to baby in hospital because it frees up mum's capacity to be there for their baby. Related to that, we've also got sort of those other sort of household or domestic duties. Preparing the home for when baby comes back, ensuring that other children are supported as well. So then that relationship between siblings, etc., can be, I guess, happy and healthy and harmonious. And then the last one is an indirect effort relates to supporting feeding practices. So dads being able to support their partner as they're feeding their infant can also be really helpful, especially what we know about feeding and nutrition for newborns. So those are sort of the 6 strategies that not me, but the research is saying are, I guess, proven strategies to support a preterm baby.
Yeah, I love that. I especially like the discussion around those indirect ways to support the mum and the baby. So I think, often their dads might just feel like they're not doing anything useful because maybe they're at work and they can't be, in the NICU physically supporting the baby as much as they'd like, but just how crucial having, a clean working home and that all the errands are still being run, that just takes that stress, alleviates that from the mum and baby, and she can just focus on her infant as well.
And also on top of that, some of these babies are coming so early that they haven't put the cot together or purchased the cot or purchased the pram, because they were going to do that when mum maybe potentially went on maternity leave and the baby turns up at 25, 26 weeks. It's really tough. I think that's really important to say, is that it's those indirect things of how they can be helping, particularly when there's other children. But I've worked on a placement at NICU and talking to mums about how they're coping, and then asking about dad, and they sometimes say, he's fine, but he probably needs to talk to someone as well. But there's some magical ways that those fathers are actually supporting them by cooking meals, by having stuff frozen, particularly if those fathers have to go back to their hometowns that may be, an hour, 2 hours, up to 4 or 5 hours away from Townsville. It's just those special ways that they can support that mum during the week when they have to go back to work.
And Leah, I also remember you mentioning that mums, just them having enough water, getting some sunlight, having meals 3 times a day when they're laser focused on their preterm infant. So having the dad just, bring lunch, or, have you had some water today? Have you gone for a little walk?
That's right.
Just those really basic needs as well, ensuring that she's supported.
And it is your basic needs of being able to cope in such a stressful time. But, those 3 basic needs of water, drinking, and how are you sleeping definitely applies to dad as well, because you need to make sure that both of your cups are full and both of you are able to really support each other and look after each other, so you can support that child while you're in that NICU environment.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that it's not just dads who do these sorts of thankless tasks. A lot of mums do them as well. And so it's a really good opportunity for me to say something along the lines of, the research makes it very clear around just how important those sometimes thankless or forgotten tasks can be. You might not be in that position where you're the person who's there holding your baby at that particular point in time, but the fact that you're working hard, doing a lot of stuff around the house, making meals, picking up the other kids, all of that work is benefiting your baby. You just may not see that as immediately as someone who can hold a crying baby and all of a sudden it's not crying, but it's just as important.
Thank you so much for joining us, Vincent. That'll be incredibly helpful for new parents listening.